offer. The services negotiations are still ongoing. They're fairly complex. So in terms of services trade under the AfCFTA, that is yet to start. But we hope that by the end of the year, things should look much different. The deadline for finalization of the schedules and the regulatory frameworks in those 5 priority sectors has been set for June 2021. This June 2021 is looking very, very complicated and weighty. So we then have 7 remaining service sectors. The deadline for finalizing the commitments in those is set for December 2021. So this year is really quite important. Now let me turn to the protocol on dispute settlement. David has already said quite a lot on the protocol. It's really a very important piece of the legal architecture of the AfCFTA. The protocol establishes the dispute settlement mechanism, which in turn establishes a process that is to be transparent, accountable, fair, predictable, and consistent with the provisions of the agreement. It's an important plank because it preserves the rights and obligations of the state parties, meaning the panel and the appellate body in their findings cannot add to, they cannot diminish any rights and obligations of states. So the recommendations and rulings of the DSB are aimed at achieving a satisfactory settlement of the dispute in accordance with those rights and obligations. And it's important to note, and David already covered this, that although the persons trading under the AfCFTA are juridical persons, they're companies or enterprises or businesses, if a dispute arises between companies from different state parties, the disputes are then taken up by those state parties and submitted to the DSB. So the company's disputes will be played out at the state level. Now, with the protocol being in force, panels and the appellate body can be established under the DSB to hear disputes relating to implementation and interpretation of the agreement. We all know that even the best treaties have to be tested through the manner in which they are implemented by the state parties and as issues arise, and the AfCFTA is no different. So the Secretariat will now keep a roster of eligible persons for the panels. Each state can nominate 2 people per year to the roster, indicating experience, qualifications, specialization, etc. And that list will then have to be approved by the DSB once it's convened. Now, once these panels are established, disputes on any matter with respect to the agreement can be heard. Of course, under the protocol, the parties are free to settle any dispute through arbitration if they wish, so long as they notify such choice and eventual award to the DSB. It's really important.
Looks like Beatrice is frozen, unfortunately. Perhaps, okay, let's see if she comes back. Perhaps the best. Beatrice, are you back?
I'm back.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Please go ahead. I think you were wrapping up.
Yes, I was just going to say a word or two on the phase 2 and phase 3 negotiations. Phase 2 negotiations, we all know, include
All right. Okay. Perhaps what we could do is let Beatrice answer that during the Q&A session and move on to our second panelist. Right. As I'm going to continue your beautiful words, poetic words, Anthony, and say we're beating the drums, and how is Afro-Exim dancing to the beat of these drums?
Thank you very much, Larry. It is important to just highlight the fact that the African Export-Import Bank, in the implementation of its current strategic plan called Impact 2021, has 4 pillars. The pillars of this strategy are industrialization and export development, intra-African trade promotion, trade finance leadership, and financial soundness and performance. But for the purposes of this discussion, I will mostly concentrate on intra-African trade promotion and industrialization and export development. I happen to have been in a meeting in Addis a couple of years ago. And in that meeting, I had a very profound illustration of what this AfCFTA is all about. We were made to understand that looking from afar, the AfCFTA is like a beautiful forest. It is when you go into the forest, then you realize that there are some short trees, there are long trees, or there are tall trees, there are leaves that are green, there are leaves that are yellow, there are animals that are crawling, there are those that are running, there are birds that are flying. Now, the point of that illustration is to the effect that within the AfCFTA, there are several actors, and each and every one of them must play its important role to keep that forest vibrant and to keep the AfCFTA alive. It is in this context that DFIs like Afreximbank come into play. Prophetically, the arrowhead of Afreximbank strategy is intra-African trade promotion. Within the intra-African trade strategy, the bank has further 4 pillars. We have create, connect, and deliver, which underline the bank's intra-African trade strategy. Under the create pillar, what the bank is currently doing is ensuring that it builds capacity, supporting African entities to be able to produce either semi-processed or processed products, so building capacity under the create pillar. Under the connect pillar, the bank is working to ensure that when the goods are produced, we are able to link producers to buyers in order to ensure that the producers do not just store their products, but they're already buyers who are buying them. Then under the deliver pillar in the intra-African trade strategy, what the bank is doing is that we have appreciated the challenges in terms of infrastructure or trade carrying infrastructure across the continent. So under deliver, the bank is supporting the development of trade carrying infrastructure across the continent and logistics for that matter, so that producers can connect with buyers through an effective means of distributing that product. At the end of the day, it's also important for us to understand whether we are still on the right track or there are things that we need to do. So then we created the auxiliary pillar measure. We should be at any point in time be able to measure where we have come in terms of our intra-African trade promotion. Let me indicate that the bank, in its wisdom, once again, has ensured that its portfolio of intra-African trade has so much increase in order to support the agenda of the AfCFTA. Industrialization and export development, what are we doing there? As Professor Luke highlighted, intra-African trade is largely dominated by semi-processed or manufactured products. And so the bank is, under its industrialization and export development, is establishing what we call industrial parks. The purpose of the industrial parks is to ensure that we are also creating capacity for manufacturing, for semi-processing, to ensure that countries can trade among themselves within the continent. Of course, we know the financing challenges, the payment challenges. So in terms of the payments, a lot of Africans, we all know, rely on the US dollar or the euro or the pound sterling in order to trade. What the bank has done together with the AfCFTA or the AU is now introduce what we call Pan-African Payment and Settlement Platform or system. That enables me, a Ghanaian sitting in Accra, and maybe want to buy something, maybe want to buy Yamachoma and Ugali from Nairobi. I can buy my Yamachoma and Ugali, pay with Ghana cedis, and then the seller in Nairobi also get Kenya shillings without necessarily relying on the use of the US dollar or the euro or the pound sterling. Not only that, we also realize that for the CFTA to be successful, it is important for countries to be assured that they are not going to suffer as a result of being members or parties or operating under the CFTA. So the bank introduced what we call the AfCFTA adjustment facility. What that does is to provide some assurance for countries that may go through some fiscal revenue losses as a result of operating under the AfCFTA, so that they can be cushioned or they can be catered for. So these are some of the things that the African Export-Import Bank is doing as a key player in the forest of the AfCFTA to ensure the success of the implementation of the CFTA. Believe you me, it is a huge opportunity. The AfCFTA is a huge opportunity for the continent. Our success in the AfCFTA can only promote Africa from the level it is now onto a higher pedestal. And we are on board to make sure that this novel, this landmark initiative work for the betterment of the continent and its people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. That was very enlightening and very practical, actually. So I'll come back to you with a lot of questions. We already have a lot of questions from our attendees. Luisa, I am now over to you with regards to the opportunities, what our lawyers can do, what our judiciaries are expected to do, and what is AMK doing also to take advantage of the CFTA.
Thank you, Leo. So from our perspective, the AfCFTA is the sexiest thing to happen to Africa in a long time, if not, in recent history. And if you're a legal practitioner on the continent, you should be jumping up and down in excitement because of the opportunities that it provides, not just for the legal practice, generally speaking, but in terms of the economies of your countries and integration within the world economy and so forth. So I'm going to be talking very generally about some of the opportunities that we see, and I'm going to be encouraging you to please just join the fray. If you haven't been thinking about it very seriously, there are a lot of things that you could do. The AfCFTA will definitely shift the legal practice on the continent to a more international law-oriented focus, in our view. And this is going to be correlated very closely to the increase in the volume of the trade flow between the various countries that are within the free trade area. And therefore, that's going to mean that a lot of us are going to have to get very well acquainted with the technical aspects of the agreement, and that we're going to have to be advising a lot of people about the implications that it brings. So in terms of very concrete opportunities that we see, Beatrice spoke earlier about how the panels are going to be constituted within the dispute settlement body and how they're appointed or nominated by the states. So of course, that is a very obvious area. These panels are going to have to be appointed, and they're going to require people who are specialists in international trade law, in the AfCFTA, in just dispute resolution in general, in handling very complex cross-border issues as well as geopolitical issues. If you're very ambitious and you're looking forward, that is definitely an area that should interest you. There will certainly be a need for an increase in dispute settlement lawyers that specialize in international trade. And I've spoken to practitioners in this space in other more mature jurisdictions from a legal standpoint. And actually what they've said is that in some ways that market is saturated because international trade law has always been the subject of significant interests by law students and young practitioners, and there isn't necessarily enough opportunities for those people to join firms that have these types of practices. But that isn't the case for Africa right now. We have the opposite problem. We have a huge demand now and not enough supply of people who are sufficiently trained and experienced in this area. So that is a big opportunity that should be seized. There will be a need for dispute settlement lawyers who support the panelists in the dispute settlement process, as is the case under the WTO's dispute settlement body as well. You'll need people who are delivering on substantive legal advice and conducting legal and technical research, advising on procedural issues. And there will also be a need for dispute lawyers who are acting as legal counsel on behalf of the state parties that are going before the panel, the appellate body, or an arbitral tribunal. As you probably know, the FCFTA will be comprised of various organs, the same way as the WTO. So there will, of course, be a need for people who work for those organs and who are legal specialists and have expertise in various areas, from issues like rules of origin, competition issues, legislative drafting, policy drafting, and so forth. There's an area that some international law firms have capitalized. There's one particular law firm in Switzerland called Van Baal that has really taken advantage of this, which is acting as trade remedies experts. So the FCFTA provides for trade remedies in Part 5 of the Protocol on Trade in Goods and Annex 9 on the trade remedies. What these are basically measures taken in response to adverse trade practices like dumping. And just to give you an idea, between 1995 and 2020, there have been over 6,000 trade remedy actions initiated by WTO reporting members. It's about 240 a year on average. So that's a big opportunity. There will be, of course, a need for legal advisors to advise governments, the state parties, foreign governments, and of more interest to firms like A&K, for example, is advice to private parties who are trading between each other. They want to understand how the FCFTA works, what it means to them, foreign investors who are also looking to capitalize on the opportunities that are generated, and that's a huge area. And as Professor Luke mentioned, it is very important that there is, as he called it, a vanguard, so a set of ambassadors or people who are spreading the word, who are explaining what the FCFTA is, what it means from a practical standpoint, what it means from a political standpoint, and just making sure that we're upping the ante in terms of just living in accordance to the rule of law, ensuring that all these mechanisms are working properly, that the people under them are properly trained. And in that sense, there is a huge need for legal training. And I can tell you this from experience because we just announced the launch of this international trade practice, I think in November of 2020. And we've already received so many requests for trainings that we can barely handle them because we ourselves need to first train ourselves before we can go out and train other people. So we've had to spend a lot of time learning the materials, reviewing the protocols, reviewing the drafts, trying to figure out what's going on around other overlapping agreements. For example, the negotiations between Kenya and the US on the free trade agreement, what's happening between Kenya and the UK on the economic partnership agreement, what the interaction of that is with the FCFTA. So there's a lot of need for that. And finally, if we do achieve this dream of eventually a customs union and we are working towards radical liberalization of market access in not just trade in goods, but also trade in services, that could mean for lawyers that through mutual recognition agreements or other mechanisms, someone who is trained in Uganda can, cross the border and work in a neighboring country. It is difficult because in the law there are a lot of regulations around where you can practice, but that is certainly a dream that I understand it, and Beatrice can correct me if I'm wrong. The AfCFTA is trying to realize. In terms of what we're seeing other firms do on the continent, we actually would have expected a much bigger uptake in the specific practice area. As far as we know, and I could be wrong, I think ANK was the first indigenous law firm to announce the launch of an international trade law practice that is dedicated to that. We understand Weber Wenzel in South Africa has also announced the launch of its practice or the existence of a practice. White & Case in South Africa as well, although White & Case is an international law firm that is already leading in international trade law matters, headed out of the Washington, D.C. office. But there is scope for a lot more. And if it is the case that for some reason East African lawyers are focusing more, I do encourage everyone else to start looking into this from all corners of the continent. In terms of what we are trying to achieve within ANK, there are a couple of things. There are the lofty goals that we've always set for ourselves. And you can see that more in the context of the Africa Legal Network, which is our wider alliance, and what we're trying to do with some of the entities within the alliance, like the ALN Academy. And that is truly and honestly, and that is not a for-profit arm of ALN. We are very committed to improving the rule of law on the continent, and we spend a lot of time, resources, and money trying to help with capacity building in that respect. And then from the perspective of ANK as a law firm and our fellow law firms in the other ALN countries, what we're trying to do is leverage our existing expertise in terms of taxes, tariffs, commerce, investment, dispute resolution, anti-corruption expertise, transparency issues, and just apply that to this new reality that we're trying to build. We are, very, very optimistic about the amount of work that will come out of this once everyone wraps their head around the implications of something as big as the AfCFTA. A lot of these law firms that I've mentioned that have launched these practices all happen to have either international or regional networks. But in my view, that is not at all a prerequisite for getting involved on international trade matters. There are many, many things that can be done in this space. And I encourage you to explore them. I'm happy to also chat to people on the side about this and about some of the ideas that we have in this respect. And that's it for me for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Luisa. Now on to the awesome part of the event, which is the Q&A part. And I'm sure we have so many questions from our attendees. It's kind of difficult. So I'm gonna shoot straight at Beatrice and hopefully invite David to come in and comment as well. We received a very interesting question. Beatrice, can you potentially start telling us a bit about phase 2 and phase 3 of the negotiations that you were about to do earlier? But as you add that, there was an understanding when the AfCFTA was going to come, or at least going to start being negotiated, that African countries are to hold off on signing the VITs to see exactly, just so the negotiations can go until negotiations are done. The question that we have before us is, if the US and Kenya sign an FTA, is this likely to lead to disputes involving AfCFTA members in Kenya? And if so, how do you envision such disputes will be handled given the political risk? So I hand over to Beatrice and hope that David will come and say a word, if that's okay with you, David.
So thank you, Leu, and that is a very interesting question. In fact, that's been very topical all last year as the two parties were sort of outlining their negotiation objectives. I had wanted to say at the end of my presentation earlier that you all know that the phase 2 negotiations, I wanted to let you know that the phase 2 negotiations will start during 2021. They have to be finalized by December 2021. So there's really not that much time left. And the phase 3, which very interestingly, and because of, in light of COVID-19 and the expansion and the growth in e-commerce across the continent, the leadership decided that negotiations on e-commerce should be included in which was supposed to be included in a phase 3, should now be kind of merged with phase 2. So again, those negotiations should be concluded by December 2021 as well. Now, turning to the question that you asked about, Leyu, one of the provisions in the agreement is that if a state party signs a trade agreement with a third party after the entry into force of the agreement, of the AfCFTA agreement, the concessions that are given to that third party should then be accorded to all the AfCFTA state parties. So the negotiations, the concessions, or the content of the possible FTA between Kenya and the US are being looked at very carefully, because it could then mean that those concessions then have to be accorded to all the state parties of the AfCFTA. Now, whether or not that will bring up disputes under the AfCFTA, it very likely. I can't really sort of like stick my neck out and say what those will include. It seems to me that if, for instance, investment is included before the protocol, the AfCFTA protocol on investment is signed, then that also colors the negotiations for the eventual AfCFTA protocol on trade on investment. This broadened trade agreement with Kenya and the US, I think will be looked at very, very carefully to see how it will impact on the AfCFTA and the other state parties. I'll hand over to David, because he can then give some further perspectives on that. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. David, can we pick your brain on this a little bit?
Yes, Leyu, thank you very much. Yes, I think Beatrice has given a very loyally answer to the question and has laid it all out. And yes, of course, Kenya is well within its rights to negotiate with the third party. That is provided for. After all, it's a free trade area agreement. The AfCFTA is a free trade area agreement. But having said that, my own view, and this is where the freedom that I am now walking into as an academic, and no longer having the shackles of having to stick to the script, so to say. My own view is that this agreement is premature. Let me firstly illustrate it by saying that you're building a house, and the house is not complete, but you want to start living in it. It doesn't quite work. You have to complete the house. But aside from that, academic analysis have shown that in terms of sequencing, the benefits that are projected for the AfCFTA on inter-African trade will flow insofar as the agreement is fully in force. Once the agreement is fully in force, and keep in mind that, as Beatrice has explained, for trading goods, we do expect it will take several years for the liberalization process to be completed. In all, it's expected to take about 13 years. That once you've finished with that process, you could be looking at agreements with third parties based on what the internal arrangements already are. So you can negotiate on that basis. The other aspect, of course, is that Kenya and the US, what we will say, on asymmetrical economies. They're different in terms of the way their economies are structured. I don't need to elaborate on that. And there are always risks when you have a smaller partner negotiating with a bigger partner. And basically, we've seen this. Rwanda and the US had a dispute over second-hand clothes. The US had far more leverage over Rwanda on that issue. If Africa could negotiate trade agreements as a continental bloc, it would have much more leverage than trying to do this individually. And what is going on the continent, not just with the US, but also with the EU, with the UK, and also with partners like China, where there is no structured framework for trade. What's happening is they're picking off the African countries one by one. They're seeing that our market is interesting, and they're penetrating this market. We have an article that we titled "The New Scramble for Africa." So in a sense, this is, I think, what is happening, and it's official AU policy, as I understand it, that AU members should refrain from negotiating these agreements until the AfCFTA process is complete. But it appears that this is not being adhered to. No, I think it's not a good strategy to engage in these bilaterals. I think we need to wait for another 13 to 15 years. It's not that we should not negotiate, that's not the point, but it's too early. Let's build this house. And once the house is complete and we're sure about all aspects of it, then I think we can get into these negotiations. And meanwhile, we are the poorest, let me end with this, I don't want to go on for too long. We are the poorest continent. We have the leverage to tell our partners, look, we're poor. We're trying to get our act together, give us time. And there is a strong constituency in all of these countries, in civil society, even in the business community, to give us the time that we need. Our GDP that we are celebrating, 2.5 trillion, is less than just the UK alone. UK is about 2.9 trillion. This is 55 African countries, 2.5 trillion. So what are we talking about? I think we need to be careful. Otherwise, these benefits will not flow. The modeling results are very clear and it's on our side. We have all the arguments on our side. We should not throw it away.
I absolutely share that sentiment, David. Now, moving on to Anthony, and this is pretty much related to what you were saying earlier. It's, if the AfCFTA was to be a forest, you walk in and you realize some countries, some trees are bigger than the others, and some leaves and different colors. And so in a way, it's in 2019, Afrexim Bank had committed $1 billion to support countries to accelerate the ratification of the CFTA and address significant losses from tariff reduction from different African countries. So are countries tapping into this? How is this facility working? Tell us more about that.
Thank you. No country has tapped into it yet. What has happened is that the AU has bought into it, and the bank is currently working with the AfCFTA Secretariat, because some recommendations have been made to phase the structure of the facility. And so that is what is being worked on now. Hopefully, we should be done by the middle of the year, if the timelines and the milestones that are being worked on are taken into account. And so I can say that it's not operational yet. We are currently working hand in hand with the FCA Secretariat to implement or to revise the document based on the recommendation received from the governors. And so we will have it in place.
Okay, that's really great. And that leads me to a question to Lisa, which is, how are you talking to your clients about the AfCFTA and the opportunities that's going to present to them. Are you doing something in that line? I'm guessing there's interest, definitely. Earlier we had a poll about whether the CFTA is going to affect your area, our attendees' areas of practice, and a good almost 80% said yes. So tell us more how you're communicating that opportunity with your clients, Louisa.
Yes, for us as an entity, I indicated earlier that the future of the bank is the future of the continent. Within the AfCFTA, intra-African trade is critical. And so currently what the bank is doing is that every opportunity we get, we let our clients know that intra-African trade
I think we might have lost Anthony. In the meantime, Louisa, can you take on and answer how you're communicating with your clients?
Sure. Yeah, on our end, we are trying to put together a number of initiatives on trade matters generally, not just on the AfCFTA, but as the sentiments expressed by Professor Luke indicate, also with regards to what's going on with the US, Kenya, FTA, the UK, Kenya, EPA, and so forth. We are trying to do this in a number of ways. One, participating in events such as this one. We're going to be doing another event with the British High Commission in a week's time, also on trade matters. So we're trying to speak about these issues and address them to our client base that we think is going to be impacted. We customize our invitations in that way. We're also trying to write quite a bit about it, articles in the papers, but also just legal alerts that we send out. And in terms of interest, we definitely have received inquiries, especially on the AfCFTA, that has been quite a hot topic since the beginning of January. But to be honest, the queries are really very general. I think people find this a lot to chew on, and they need someone to distill what it's about and what it means to them and the implications. I think that the really interesting, detailed technical questions will come once trade within the AfCFTA begins, in earnest, and people actually come across real life problems. And hopefully we'll be in a position to address those now. Right now, what we're seeing mainly is just a very general buzz around anything related to the AfCFTA. And we're also getting a lot of interest actually from young law students and young practitioners. I think the highest number of resumes we've ever received, with respect to any announcement, was following our announcement of the launch of this practice. So clearly people are attuned to the topic, and we just need to keep just digging a little bit deeper into the more sophisticated issues around it and the implications for our countries and for the continent.
Perfect. So let me, this is a question that has come up consistently in the chat room, and I want to see if both, I think even Professor Luca could actually answer this as well. I'll start with Beatrice and Anthony. So we already have COMESA, we already have SADC, we have the EAC, we have so many trading blocs in the continent. How are the trade agreements going to be affected by the CFTA? How is that going to work? What does that mean?
May I start? Hi, Leo. Yes. Well, even as we were negotiating the AfCFTA agreement, it was recognized that the RECs are the building blocks, that we weren't starting from a blank slate. And so there is specific recognition in the preamble of the agreement that the RECs are the building blocks, and the RECs are the laws, the policies from the RECs are considered acquis for the agreement. And many aspects of the agreement have been benchmarked on the what is happening in the RECs already, what is happening in terms of either law or institutional processes, etc. So we are building on this foundation that's already there. And of course, there are some regs that are more advanced than others in terms of treaty law or institutional structures, but we are learning from each and every one of them. So just to give you an example, in trade and services, for instance, in the EAC, there was more experience and expertise on if we looked at, we took the model of the WTO, but then we looked at what was happening in the EAC, we looked at what was happening in ECOWAS. ECOWAS has a lot of the regulatory frameworks that we are using at the protocol is this hybrid approach. So we looked at regulatory frameworks being developed under ECOWAS, and on the EAC side, we looked at what, in terms of commitments, scheduling, that kind of thing. So we are building on a foundation that's already there.
Perfect, thank you. Anthony, can you add on this?
No, I'm not sure I can add anything to that. I think she said it all, yeah.
Perfect. I'll ask David if he can come in and perhaps say a word.
Yes, and what I would say is that two things. Firstly, when countries that are not in the same REC want to trade with each other, they have to do so not on preferential terms, but on WTO terms, because they're not. So Nigeria and South Africa, the two biggest economies, are not in a preferential area, and so trade on WTO terms. So Kenya and Ghana, to take the bigger economies, and obviously that kind of arrangement, you're losing potential business just given the fact of what the situation is. The second point I would make is that the economies of the RECs actually remain very small. Keep in mind what I said, just in terms of scale, that the whole continent, the continental GDP is 2.5 trillion or so. And when you slice this down to the RECs, it's even much smaller. So companies cannot grow within the RECs to scale, to the potential and the scale that the continental market offers. So I think that is the argument from an economic point of view for moving towards a continental system. But having said this, it would be my hope, since also the AfCFTA agreement provides for this, that we would see the RECs take on another role, not so much in trade liberalization, but in the sort of policy areas, especially dealing with supply side constraints, infrastructure, productive capacity, those sorts of issues, I think, and leave the trade arena to be handled and managed in a much more coherent way by the African Union on behalf of the entire continent. I think for me, that would be the ideal and would be the most rational way for trade policy on our continent to evolve. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm muting. Finding the unmute button was a bit of a problem. Well, my question now, moving from you, is with regards to the heart of the matter of this entire webinar, which is disputes, right? We are disputes lawyers at the end of the day. We are arbitration lawyers. So, and most of our attendees are arbitration lawyers. So, the question is, it's a two-pronged question. So we have a question from Funke Adekoya, particularly to Beatrice, which is, what is the tenure time for the judges on the panel on the DSB? And the other question is towards Louisa, which is particularly, if there were, what role do you think the arbitration institutions will play? And this is a question from Emilia and a few others, which is, what role are arbitration centers supposed to play, particularly in disputes that are just going to be purely intra-African and necessarily intergovernmental? As David mentioned earlier, our governments don't like to take things to tribunals. They like to negotiate and use diplomacy to get out of it. But what do you think that is going to be? So I'll start with Beatrice.
Yes, I think I can you hear me? I think I had already answered the question that was posed about the 10-year. So the DSB is the dispute settlement body, and that is kind of like a committee. It's going to be, the membership of that is going to be all the state parties basically fielding their legal representatives to that committee, and that committee will have oversight of the panels and the appellate body. Now, for the panels, there will be this roster that is kept by the Secretariat, and each state party can suggest 2 names, giving, you know, curriculum vitae and all that kind of thing, specialization, to the Secretariat, saying, oh, we have these excellent lawyers, you know, they can serve on these panels whenever, and it'll be then up to the DSB to choose which panelists are then attached to which case, you know, based on impartiality and all this kind of stuff. And of course, if you have a particular dispute under the DSM, then you know, your lawyer or your legal practitioner cannot be part of that case. So, and the tenure is going to also be decided by the DSB. These are all the things that will now be decided as part of the implementation process.
Yes, Louisa, the roles of arbitration centers in purely commercial disputes.
Sure, thanks, Liu. Yeah, actually, I wanted to throw this question back at Beatrice later if she can address it, because I'm pretty interested in the 2-pronged approach under the AfCFTA. And the reason for that is that my understanding is that under the WTO, the dispute settlement mechanism has been extremely effective. One of the few bodies of that type that have actually worked very, very well as a rules-based system. And therefore, I would have expected that we would attempt to replicate that type of success on the continent and to rely on the system of panels and the appellate body. I think one of the appealing things about it, which in arbitration we wouldn't really have, is the ability to appeal a decision, right? With an arbitration, you have a final award, and then that's where things end, except in a very small set of circumstances. I do think that one of the reasons why arbitrations may have an advantage, though, is the general mistrust in the judiciary. I think Professor Luke alluded to this before, and that is that African states have traditionally been extremely reluctant to actually litigate trade disputes before the WTO. I think there are 4 African member states to the WTO, which is something like 27% of the total member states. So a significant percentage, and yet only 4 African countries have ever actually, been before the dispute settlement body on a dispute. And in all those instances, only Tunisia has been there as a claimant. In all the other cases, the other countries, which are some of the more developed countries on the continent, have been there as respondents. And I think, there are several reasons for that. One being, as Professor Luke had alluded to, the absence of leverage from the African countries vis-a-vis the trade partners, and probably the feeling that nothing much may be achieved if the other state refuses to comply with the decision of a panel or the appellate body. But there are other reasons as well, which is just probably potential fear on the continent about state party intervention in terms of the decisions that the DSB makes, feelings about corruption. I think something like 1/3 of Africans feel that members of a judiciary are corrupt. So because of those challenges that will need to be overcome, and hopefully successfully and relatively quickly by the AfCFTA in terms of developing trust in the institution, I do think that there could be a role for arbitral institutions to take on some of those matters and decide them in a forum that might be perceived as more trustworthy or more familiar to those who have a dispute. But my hope is that both can work in parallel, and I do want to hear from Beatrice about what the understanding is within the AfCFTA about what the interplay will be, because my understanding is when it comes to the WTO, actually arbitration hasn't really been used very much in that respect.
Yeah. Yep, correct, Luisa. I mean, you're under fire, Beatrice, with regards to this. And, before I let you answer, I think it's important that we make a note that the new WTO DG is a Nigerian woman, the first. And this is a moment of pride for the continent. But, before he left, the previous DG of the WTO was very clear that the biggest challenge, and in fact, one of the biggest challenges that she will face and that he has faced towards the end of his tenure is the lack of the judges and panels members in the appellate body. And, I think it would be great to mention what the dispute protocol in the AfCFTA has in order to make sure we don't end up in a similar situation. What have we learned from WTO? So over to you, Beatrice.
Thank you very much, Leu, and thanks, Lisa, for that. I think there's just a couple of things I wanted to clarify, and I think I had answered. There was a question on the Q&A chat. Although the protocol makes provision for arbitration, to my reading of it is that this is an external process, and it is done on mutual consent of the parties. They must agree on the procedures for arbitration and then notify the DSB. So the implication is that arbitration doesn't come under the usual DSB. The DSB is just overseeing the panel and the appellate body. And so under the DSM, there's no specific arbitration procedure. So there's this external process, it's by mutual consent, but if you then opt for arbitration, you can't then use the panel and appellate body process. And then once you have your arbitration award, you notify it to the DSB for enforcement. And it's basically then goes under the same provisions of the Articles 24 and 25, dealing with recommendations and rulings of the panel and the suspension of concessions, etc. It's only at that point that the DSB can then then enforce. If the losing party refuses to cooperate, then the matter can be referred to the DSB. But it's not as if the DSB then has oversight of this arbitration process. It's kind of separate. Then once you've gone and done what you need to do with the two parties, you then come and notify. And if you run into problems, then you get issues. But for instance, the DSB doesn't then have a roster of, say, arbitrators, commercial arbitrators that it keeps and then sets up the arbitration panel or anything like that. I actually think that there is a missed opportunity here, because I think it would have been really great for the rise in commercial arbitration and the fact that we now have some really credible arbitration centers on the continent to begin to kind of almost shepherd this the growth of commercial arbitration under the AfCFTA. But I think this unfortunately is a bit of a missed opportunity. But just wanted to clarify that it's a separate process. The parties go away, do what they need to do, then come and notify. I hope that helps to answer the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beatrice. And I think perhaps that opportunity would potentially come up in the investment protocol. I know we've had the opportunity to speak with a few international arbitration centers within the continent about almost 2 years ago at this point. It feels so long ago. But yeah, hopefully that will come through. Before we wrap up, and I think I'm told we're about to run over, I have a question for Anthony that we can't not ask, which is related to COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19 on businesses in the continent. Afreximbank has just published a report very much related to understanding this and also the CFTA in December of 2020. Sorry, can you tell us a bit more about that? The gist of that report.
Which report is that? Are you referring to?
The report on trade in Africa, focused on informal trade and impact of COVID-19 in Africa.
Oh, okay. Okay. Are you talking about the bank's intra-African trade,
Yes.
African trade report?
Exactly.
Yes. Now, for us as every African bank, we've also noted with much concern the effect of the COVID-19 on business across the continent. If you would recall, the very first thing that the bank did in March of 2020 was to introduce what we call the PATINFA, pandemic trade mitigation facility. Now, what we did with that was to ensure that countries and entities that were so affected by the COVID could tap into this facility to ensure orderly adjustment of their processes. And indeed, we are very much aware of how COVID has affected businesses, especially the SME sector. So what we have also done is to ensure, based on meritocracy, dealing with our clients, the number of years or months of grace period that can be given them, any facility that we can give or to support the operations, we are also doing all of that. One other question that someone asked as a participant was to the effect that the person wanted to know whether the Pan-African payment system is working, and where can he find it. I can only tell you that currently the bank is working with the 5 central banks in West Africa: Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, and Guinea. Now, so trial operations is targeted at May 2021, and then go live will be in June. So as we speak right now, we are working and putting the finishing touches together to ensure that we go live in June. And once that is done, the website and all that will then be made so public, and people can then go and access it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. As we are wrapping up our session, I would like to give each speaker 1 minute, just 1 minute, to highlight what they believe is a very notable point that they would like our attendees to take. Before that, I want to apologize to our attendees whose questions I was unable to ask. I hope you will get your answers either directly from our speakers, or that you're just going to have to wait for another session for us to be able to discuss this. Let me start with David. 1 minute.
Well, I think the main takeaway is that, and all the panelists have touched on this, is that the AfCFTA is a huge opportunity for Africa. Actually, I'll go so far to say that if we are thinking about development on this continent, about poverty reduction, there is no alternative. I mean, no country has developed without having a robust trade profile. And it's not going to be different for any African country. So trade is our hope. Already trade revenues, multiple of revenues from all the other sources, all the other inflows into the continent, whether it's development assistance, it's remittances, it's foreign direct investment, trade revenues, multiple of those combined. So that just gives you an idea of the potential and the scale. So I think we have to get this right. And I have no doubt that the institutions that we have set up are in very good hands. These are people who know the issues very well and are passionate about the issues. And we wish them well, and we'll be following all the activities and supporting and cheering from the sidelines, and also criticizing when we need to, and that will be happening. So I think this is a great opportunity for the continent, and really want to see us make the most of it.
Thank you so much, David. Beatrice?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leo. This has been a really great conversation, and I'm really privileged to be part of it. I think flowing from what David said is that there does need to be, we have this tool as the AfCFTA. in order to use it, there has to be a mindset change across the board for all Africans, so that we move away from this stance of different fragmented countries and people to a more common stance of unity of purpose. And I think lawyers can play a huge role in this endeavor through their legal writing, their advice, their advocacy, their legal practice. We already see there's been a strong leadership and momentum on the AfCFTA that the heads of state and the ministers have provided. We witnessed the speed with which the agreement was concluded. It was ratified in record time. Now we have to ensure that that kind of mindset, that we can do things together, no matter what our differences are, that it percolates down to the ordinary African as the agreement is implemented by so many different stakeholders on the continent, whether they're customs officials, immigration officers, lawyers, doctors, all the types of professionals, engineers, to the entrepreneurs, the women that are part of the informal cross-border trade. All of us have a role to play and to use this tool that is now in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Anthony, your 1 minute.
Yes. Yeah, for us, my biggest takeaway is the fact that the AfCFTA has come to stay. And we are not saying it's going to be easy. However, we have an adage which goes like, if it is possible, it must be done. If it is impossible, it can be done. Let's make the AfCFTA work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was very poetic and absolutely motivating. Luisa, 1 minute.
Yeah, for the next seminar, I go before Anthony, okay? No, look, from my perspective, I agree with what has been said so far, which is just this prospect of a more joined up continent that actually believes in itself and that realizes this potential of building a platform or an institution that is well respected and trusted globally. The continent has the ability to become a global powerhouse, and I think that the AfCFTA is just that instrument that will allow ourselves to realize that potential.
Thank you so much, Luisa. I am very honored to have moderated this panel. I have learned a lot, and I'm sure our attendees have learned quite a bit too. I want to, before I pass this on to Agnes, I want to thank my co-organizers for this seamless session. It takes a lot to put these things together. So, Elodie Dulac, Agnes Kita, Weru Mukaranja, thank you very much. And thank you very much for our attendees and our speakers. We are extremely grateful to you. Over to you, Agnes.
Thank you, Leyu. Excellent moderation. And thank you to every of our speakers for your time and great insights. And thank you to all our participants who are still logged in and listening to us. It was more rather over to Arimo, who will take us to the next or close the session for us. Thank you, Arimo.
Thank you, Agnes. And thank you, everyone. I would like to thank the whole panel, Professor David Lu, Leyu, Luisa, Anthony, Beatrice, excellent presentations. Thank you all. We still have a lot of options. We had I would say over 80 questions been answered, which is really excellent. So thank you very much to all participants. Now, I would like at this juncture to run an exit poll. We can have that on screen. Participants, Steve, if you can have the exit poll on screen. Do you think the continent has what it takes, the political will and industry participation to fully implement the AfCFTA by 2030? I hope the panelists have made a positive case for that, but please let us know. We shall be running the results very soon. Please take a second to vote. The discussions, do you think the continent has what it takes to fully AfCFTA by 2030? 2030. We shall close very shortly. Please take a moment to vote for that poll. And whilst that is also happening, like I said, I would like to thank participants. My goodness. Okay, so we have 50%. No, 21%. Not sure, 29%. Now, 50% yes, not sure, and no, 50%. So we have a 50-50 tie as to whether the continent takes. Positive, but again means a lot of work. Anthony, Professor David Luke, Louisa, it's up to you to do the and to give the continent a lot more, confidence and to bring on board into the continent adopting the AfCFTA by 2030. Now, I would like to thank our partners and sponsors this webinar, Anjawala and Kana LLP, who have national trade practice. Again, I'd just like to, Steve, if you can bios over so that our participants can see. I'd like to thank who joined us from the private sector, from governments, from the judicial. I'd like to thank all the countries represented. We have countries represented. Steve, if you can have that as well. As you can see, we had, over 30 presented. Thank you all very much. We have our AfCFTA represented by Beatrice Chater. Thank you very much. Our sponsor, ALN Kenya, Anjawala and Kana. Thank you for believing in EAIAC and for the support that you have provided for this. I would also like to again pass a special thank you to the panel, Professor David Luke, who is Strategic Director of Center for Africa, London School of Economics, our keynote speaker, who is also former coordinator for Africa for the UN Economic Commission for Africa, Beatrice Chater, expert trading services at the AfCFTA support unit, Anthony Coleman, economist at Afrexim Bank, Louisa Cetina, director and international trade practice at Anjawala and Kana. Now, this webinar is EAIAC of 2021. We are going to have 2 running. We're going to have a construction webinar running May of 2021. Details will follow. Please join us for that. So going to have an energy law and energy webinar running in July of 2021. Please join us. And details will come to you on email, on LinkedIn, on social media. And all off, we're going to have our EAIAC main conference, Arbitration Awards, in November of 2021. Details will follow. Please look out for that. So join us on our calendar for this year. And once again, thank you all much. As you work from home, and as you work in your offices, have time. And thank you from the EAIAC committee and the panelists again. Kwaheri.